In tattered rags on a rusted bench in Atlanta's Liberty Square, Elijah Cross, once invisible, now unmistakably black and poor, shivered as white families picnicked nearby. Then sirens, boots. 2 cops stormed in, batons raised. A jogger shouted, "He stole my wallet!" They cuffed Elijah before he could speak. "Trash like you doesn't belong here," one snarled, until Elijah's phone dropped, flashing "Tech mogul donates millions." Jaws dropped, but the damage was done. What happens when the world only sees your skin, not your truth? Subscribe now, because what comes next will shock you. This war is just beginning. Justice. 4. Elijah, stay tuned. Elijah Cross ran. The cuffs were off, but the damage was done. His heart pounded like a war drum as his sneakers slapped the pavement, lungs burning in the cold Atlanta air. Every breath felt like fire, but he couldn't stop. Not yet. Not after what they did. He was innocent. He had money, power, a name, but none of it mattered the moment they saw a black man in old clothes sitting on a park bench. Now, with half the city calling him a thief and the cops hunting him like prey, Elijah had one thought in his mind: escape. He sprinted through back alleys, eyes darting over his shoulder, sweat stinging the bruises on his face. Liberty Square was behind him, but the shame and fear stuck to his skin. The lie stuck too. "He stole my wallet." Those words echoed like a curse, louder than his truth. A police car turned the corner up ahead, tires screeching. He ducked behind a dumpster, chest heaving, fists clenched tight. He'd built a billion-dollar tech company. He'd spoken on stages across the world, but none of that mattered now. He was just another black man running. And in this world, running meant guilt. Hiding meant guilt. Breathing wrong meant guilt. The jogger's lie had sparked something ugly and deep, something waiting beneath the surface. Now that it had erupted, Elijah couldn't put it back. He pressed against the brick wall, cold and damp, trying to think. Malik, his driver, he'd texted him. But what if they got Malik, too? What if they followed the signal? His hands shook as he pulled the burner phone from his hoodie. He had one chance. One. He dialed. A ring? Then another. "Boss?" Malik's voice, low, urgent. "Where are you?" Elijah swallowed hard, voice cracking. "By the old textile mill, off 5th and Rail. Stay put, 5 minutes." The line cut. Elijah peeked around the corner. Blue lights flashed in the distance. He backed away, deeper into the alley, deeper into shadow. His ribs ached. His lip bled again. He wiped it with the back of his hand, smearing red across his chin. He was tired. Tired of running. Tired of proving himself. Tired of a world that never saw who he really was. The hoodie, the jeans, the scuffed shoes, they weren't armor. They were targets. His billionaire status, his achievements, his heart, they were all invisible here. He heard footsteps. Heavy, fast, not one pair. 2, maybe 3. Voices followed. "He went this way," a cop barked. Elijah's pulse spiked. He turned, sprinting deeper into the alley, dodging trash cans and broken glass. His lungs screamed, legs aching, but still he ran. He burst into a narrow street, eyes scanning. Where was Malik? Where? Tires squealed. A black SUV swerved into view, headlights off. Window cracked just enough for Malik to shout, "Get in!" Elijah bolted across the street. When the cop shouted again, "Stop!" Hands! A gun cocked. Elijah froze, heart hammering. His hands shot up, wide open, fingers splayed. "Don't shoot," he gasped. "Please, don't shoot!" The cop stepped closer, gun drawn. "Down on the ground! Now!" Elijah dropped to his knees. The pavement bit into him, sharp and cold. His hands trembled in the air. "I didn't do anything," he whispered. The cop didn't care. His eyes were hard, his mouth a straight line. "Wallet's in his pocket," another officer called, holding up a brown leather wallet. No, that's not mine," Elijah shouted, panic rising like bile. "He planted it! That's not mine!" But the cuffs clicked anyway. The cold bite of metal snapped against his wrists, tighter this time. The pain shot up his arms. The SUV's door hung open just feet away, Malik frozen inside, unable to help. Elijah twisted, desperate. "Please, I'm Elijah Cross!" "Elijah, I'm the CEO of—" The officer shoved him forward, cutting him off. "Save it! Every thug's got a story." They slammed him against the hood of the cruiser. Malik stepped out, fists clenched. "That's enough." Guns turned on him. Elijah screamed, "No! Don't hurt him! Don't!" Malik put his hands up, voice calm. "He's telling the truth. That man's a billionaire. You've made a mistake." One of the officers laughed, dark and cruel. "A billionaire? Wearing that?" They threw Elijah into the back of the squad car. He watched through the glass, blood drying on his face, as Malik was pushed to his knees, patted down. It didn't matter that he had millions. Didn't matter that he'd donated to schools, saved lives, changed lives. All they saw was a black man in the wrong place, wearing the wrong thing. The patrol car pulled away, red and blue lights flickering off nearby walls. Elijah sat in silence, the weight of failure pressing down on him. He had acted. He'd run, he'd fought, he'd called. But still he'd lost. Still cuffed. Still accused. Still black. The precinct loomed ahead, its concrete face like a final insult. They dragged him inside, past desks and cameras and other suspects. Some looked at him with pity, others with suspicion. No one saw him. Not really. Not who he was. They didn't even ask his name. Just another John Doe. Just another case. They shoved him into a cell, slammed the door, and walked away. He sat on the bench inside, head hanging low, eyes burning. Not from the beating, not from the bruises, but from knowing the truth. They didn't care. And no matter how hard he tried to run from it, he couldn't escape who they saw. Elijah Cross, the billionaire, the genius, the human, had vanished. Only the hoodie remained. Only the skin remained. And in their eyes, that was enough. Elijah Cross lay on the narrow jail cot, the thin mattress doing nothing to soften the ache in his ribs or the shame curling in his chest. The bruises from his rough arrest throbbed under his hoodie, now torn at the seams. Every breath hurt, his body broken, his name dragged through mud, and the truth buried beneath a lie that started on a park bench. Just a man sitting in Liberty Square, dressed like he didn't belong. That's all it took. That's all they needed to see. His empire, his accomplishments, his humanity, none of it mattered the second his hoodie and skin color combined in their minds. He'd tried to escape. He'd run. Called for help. Pleaded. None of it mattered. He was cuffed, cornered, and humiliated. Now he sat in a cell meant for criminals, while the real criminals, the ones who lied, who planted evidence, who brutalized him, walked free, heads high, Knowing no one would question their story, the cell was cold. Cracked concrete walls, a flickering bulb overhead, and a toilet that reeked of rust and neglect. Elijah curled tighter on the cot, trying to stop the bleeding in his lip with the corner of his sleeve. He didn't know what hurt more, the bruises or the betrayal. Outside the cell, voices laughed. The guards, joking about John Doe trying to act innocent. One mentioned the wallet again. Slipped it right in his hoodie. Smooth. They didn't know he could hear, or they didn't care. Malik hadn't been able to stop them. Not with guns aimed at his chest. And now Elijah didn't know where his driver was, or if he was safe. He only knew this. The moment he stepped into Liberty Square dressed as a man with nothing, the world treated him like he was worth even less. That night, they dragged him out of the cell, 2 officers smirking. Time for round 2, one whispered. Elijah didn't fight. He couldn't. His wrists were raw from the cuffs. His legs wobbled with every step. They shoved him into a room that smelled of sweat and mildew, a steel chair bolted to the ground, a table with no papers, no lawyers, just an interrogation light swinging from the ceiling like a pendulum counting down his final chances. Officer Greg Tanner stepped in first, the same one from the park, his buzz cut sharp, eyes colder than steel. Behind him came the female officer. Voss, her name tag read. Blonde bun pulled so tight it looked painful. No warmth in her eyes, just something harder, crueler. You ready to talk, thief? Tanner spat, slamming the door shut. Elijah didn't flinch, didn't answer. Tanner circled him. You're not special now, Cross. Yeah, we know your name. Big shot CEO. Tech genius. But you're in here. That hoodie makes you nobody. Voss stayed by the door. Silent. Watching. You should have just stayed rich. Stayed clean. But no. You had to test the system, huh? Tanner grabbed Elijah by the collar, yanked him from the chair. Well, you found it. And now you get to live in it. The first hit came fast, a punch to the gut that knocked the wind out of him. The second, a slap across the face that split his lip again. Blood pooled on the floor, but Elijah didn't scream, didn't cry. He took it, because if he showed pain, they'd win, and if he showed anger, they'd call him violent. Either way, they'd justify the abuse. The third hit wasn't a fist. It was a lie. Tanner slid a phone across the table. A video, a clip showing Elijah pocketing the jogger's wallet. A splice, edited, a fake. The angle was wrong. The timestamp altered. But it was clean. Believable. You see this? Tanner said, voice gleeful. Already went viral. People think you staged the whole thing. Beat yourself up for attention. You're a joke now. Elijah shook his head, voice weak. That's not real. I didn't. Tanner cut him off with a laugh. You think they care what's real? The internet eats the first story. Everything after that's damage control. And you, my friend, are damaged goods. They tossed him back in the cell after that. No food, no water, no phone call. Just silence. Just the fake video playing on a loop in his head, drowning out his truth. He lost track of time. Hours blurred. Pain pulsed in waves. Hunger clawed at his stomach. Every noise outside the bars made his heart race. Every whisper made him wonder if it was another cop coming to drag him into another room. On the third day, the guards stopped pretending. One slipped him a tray with cold eggs and moldy toast. The other leaned close, breathing hot and sour. Word is, you like setting fires. Maybe next time you burn for real. Elijah ate in silence. He needed strength, because even if the world believed the lies, He had to survive long enough to fight back. It was Malik who saved him. Not through guns or glory, but by doing what Elijah couldn't. Getting out. Finding help. Tasha Reed, a rogue journalist with fire in her pen, came knocking. She didn't care about fame. She wanted the truth. And when Malik showed her the original footage, the bruises, the timestamps, she knew. They hacked the precinct's servers, pulled raw footage of the cell. Tanner beating him, Voss kicking him, all without knowing who he really was. That video hit the internet like a bomb. The tide turned fast. Protesters flooded the streets. News anchors changed their tone. Suddenly, Elijah Cross wasn't a liar. He was a survivor. But just as the wave turned, the enemy struck again. Tanner torched the safe house, blamed it on Elijah, claimed arson, evidence tampered, Tasha arrested, files destroyed. And Elijah? He was beaten again, dragged through the streets, shown to the world like an animal in cuffs. Each time he rose, they knocked him down harder. Inside the prison, the attacks worsened. Guards slipped in at night, beat him, starved him. Other inmates spat at him. Some worshipped the lie that he was a fraud. Others feared him, but few saw him. He stitched his own wounds with thread from his shirt and a smuggled needle. Slept with one eye open. Memorized every guard's rotation, every camera's blind spot, and when Malik smuggled in a tiny earpiece, Elijah knew it was his only shot. He whispered a single word: escape. It worked. For 10 hours, he was free again. 10 hours of stolen air. 10 hours of hope. Then they found him, tracked him, beat him bloody in the street, live-streamed it to millions. And yet, the people watched. The lie crumbled. The fire he started sparked something real. Protests erupted again. This time, bigger, louder. Tanner was fired. Voss was arrested. The truth came in waves, undeniable. But the war didn't end. A bomb hit his company headquarters. 12 dead. Voss blamed him, said he funded it, used edited tapes, dead voices, and headlines to frame him again. He watched the footage in horror. His name blackened once more. A terrorist. A killer. The crowd turned. Half the nation cheered, half demanded his head. He built a final bunker, a hidden warehouse, gathered survivors from the blast, hacked Voss's accounts, found footage, audio, proof. She planned it, framed him, killed those people. They broadcast it live. The nation saw. Voss was done. But not before she stormed in, gun blazing, ready to end it herself. Elijah fought back, took a bullet in the shoulder, watched Malik pin her to the floor, watched cops arrest her, watched the city chant his name again. But it was never a full win. At a final press conference, Elijah stood tall and told the world the whole truth. Not just theirs, his. He admitted he faked some of the evidence early on, to force Tanner and Voss to slip up, to make them show who they really were. And they did. But it came at a cost. The truth was now tangled with his lies, and the crowd that once cheered him split in two. Some called him a hero, others a fraud. He left the podium broken but honest, walked away from the flashing lights, up to his rebuilt tower, alone. He stood at the glass, watching the city he nearly died trying to wake up. His ribs still sore, his shoulder tight. his soul bruised in places no surgeon could reach. He had fought the system and won. But he lost something too. Not his money, not his company, his innocence. And maybe, just maybe, his peace. He whispered to himself, voice barely a breath. Justice isn't clean. And for Elijah Cross, it never would be. If you made it this far, thank you. Drop a 1 in the comments if your heart broke for Elijah, or a 2 if you think his plan went too far. Hit like, smash subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. The war isn't over. And stories like this? They're just getting started. Elijah Cross sat in the back of a dimmed courtroom, his face barely recognizable. Swollen lip, deep bruises along his cheek, and a thick white bandage across his shoulder where Voss's bullet had grazed him just weeks ago. The whispers around him weren't whispers anymore. They were full voices, loud judgments, cameras flashing like lightning, headlines screaming across screens outside. Elijah Cross, hero or fraud? He had confessed, not to the crime they accused him of, but to bending the truth to expose a deeper one. The system was stacked, and he had stacked his own trap to flip it. But now that the war seemed over, the toll of it, the human cost, clung to him like smoke. The courtroom's overhead lights burned down on his hunched frame, as if trying to judge him too, asking him the same question the world kept screaming. Was it worth it? Every breath still hurt. His ribs hadn't healed fully. His shoulder pulled with every motion, a reminder of how close he'd come to dying at Voss's hands. And yet, none of that compared to the pain in his heart, the quiet, aching loneliness that gripped his soul. He'd fought so hard to tell the truth, but now he didn't know who would still listen. Half the world saw a man who'd unmasked corruption. The other half saw a manipulator who used pain like a weapon. He wanted to scream that he did it for the 12 people who died in that bombing, for the boys who looked like him sitting on cold benches in parks, for the women who got followed through stores because of their skin. He did it for justice. But that word, justice, it no longer tasted sweet in his mouth. It felt bitter, burned. The courthouse emptied slowly, strangers brushing past him with mixed glances, some nodding with respect, others shaking their heads. He didn't try to explain. He had no words left, just the weight of a story that had shattered him from the inside out. Malik waited outside the courthouse, his graying beard looking more silver now, his usual calm now carved with concern. "You holding up, boss?" he asked. Elijah gave a small nod, but didn't speak. He slid into the back seat of the SUV, his body sinking into the leather like it was swallowing him. The city outside pulsed with life, unaware, or unwilling to see, just how much of Elijah's had been ripped apart to light this fire. That night, Elijah didn't sleep. He sat on the edge of his penthouse bed, 50 floors above Atlanta, watching the skyline he used to command. Now it looked like a battlefield, lights flickering like bullets. Sirens howling in the distance. The war was quiet on the outside, but inside him, it still raged. He pulled up the confession video on his laptop, watched his own face as he admitted to creating false leads to trap the cops who would have never been caught any other way. He saw the exact moment the crowd turned, when gasps filled the air and the reporters leaned forward, pens frozen. That was the moment he went from victim to villain in their eyes. And yet, he still believed in what he did. Because they had done it. Tanner did beat him. Voss did plant evidence. The lies only revealed deeper truths, and if he hadn't taken the risk, those truths would still be buried beneath polite headlines and closed-case files. But he wasn't okay. That was the truth he hadn't told. He wasn't just tired. He was broken in places no one could see. He felt hollowed out, alone. Every scar on his body was healing slower than it should because stress gnawed at him day and night. There were threats now. Letters slid under his door. "Burn for what you did." Anonymous emails calling him scum. Protesters outside his new company HQ screaming for his resignation. Board members resigning silently, not wanting to be attached to the man whose hands touched both justice and deceit. He moved to the living room, gazing out at the park where it had all started. Liberty Square. So peaceful from above. But he could still feel the cold of the bench, the suspicion in the air, the crushing weight of cuffs on his wrists. That park had seen his first defeat, and now he felt like he was back there again, emotionally cuffed, judged by every angle, and unsure of who saw him anymore. His phone buzzed. A text from a teenage boy he didn't know. "Thank you. I was scared to walk alone. Your story made me feel less invisible." Elijah stared at the message, his throat tightening. Another buzz. A woman from New York. "My brother was beaten by police last year. No one believed him. Your story helped us reopen the case." Another, and another. They didn't all hate him. Some saw him. Some believed in what he stood for. But still, his shoulders slumped, because the voices shouting hate were louder. The news anchors twisting his truth. The lawmakers calling him dangerous. The public dragging him for being flawed instead of applauding him for being brave. "Even heroes bleed," he wanted to shout. "Even warriors fall. I didn't want this fight. I just wanted the world to care." Malik came by again the next day, found Elijah sitting in silence. "You've got to speak again," he urged. "The people still following you. They need to hear you. They need to know you're not finished." Elijah didn't move. He stared at the TV screen showing clips from his trial, spliced together to make him look like a calculating liar. He finally whispered, "What if they don't want to hear me anymore?" "Then talk to the ones who do," Malik said firmly. "They're the ones who matter." And so he did. He started a live stream, just him, sitting in his apartment. No script, no cameras, just Elijah. Bruised, bandaged, honest. "I'm not here to argue," he said, voice quiet but steady. "I'm here because the weight of this story is crushing me, and I need you to know what's real." He didn't beg for forgiveness. He didn't justify every step. He simply spoke. About what it felt like to be treated like nothing. About the loneliness of being seen as a symbol, not a man. About the pain of hearing your name dragged when all you ever wanted was to make the world better. He talked about the guilt he carried for the 12 who died in that bombing. For not stopping it. For being used as the excuse for it. He told them he didn't feel victorious. He felt cracked. But he wasn't done. "I still believe justice matters," he said, leaning into the camera. "And I still believe in fighting for it, even if it hurts." The chat blew up. Thousands watching, some crying, some angry. But most, just listening. And if you're still here, still watching, still listening, Elijah needs you now more than ever. He didn't just fight for himself. He fought for all the names that never made the news. He stood on that bench in Liberty Square to shine a light, and that light nearly destroyed him. But he's still standing. Barely. And if his pain moved you, if his truth matters to you, hit that like button. Not for clicks, not for algorithms, for Elijah. To show him the world hasn't turned its back on him. To say, "I see you, I believe you, keep going." Because if we stop caring about people like Elijah, we stop caring about justice at all. His story isn't over, but whether he writes the next chapter or fades away depends on what we do now. Every click matters, every voice, every heart that chooses compassion over comfort. So if you're with him, if you believe that telling hard truths should never make someone a villain, press that like button. Drop a comment. Say something real. Encourage a man who lost almost everything to wake the world up. Because if Elijah Cross still has the strength to speak, bruised and battered as he is, then the least we can do is listen. Elijah Cross stood alone in a shadowed parking garage, the flickering overhead light casting long, fractured shadows across the cold concrete beneath his boots. His breath came shallow, lips cracked, shoulder still raw from the bullet wound that never truly healed. The city above buzzed with noise and flashing headlines, most of them naming him a criminal, a manipulator, a dangerous fraud. But here, down in this silence, with the walls echoing the pounding of his racing heart, Elijah wasn't a billionaire or a villain. He was a man about to do something unthinkable. And he knew, if it went wrong, no one would forgive him. Maybe no one should. He gripped the duffel bag tighter. Inside, encrypted drives, burner phones, a small unregistered firearm, and a key card stolen from a dead man's coat pocket weeks earlier. How he got it, no one knew. No one could know. That part of the story wasn't in the news, and it never would be. But it was the risk that turned everything upside down. The risk that made people question who Elijah really was, and what lines he was willing to cross for justice. Because what he had done, what he was still doing, wasn't clean. No, it was messy, dangerous, illegal even, but necessary. That's the part they never understood. The key card in his pocket was marked with a symbol, just 3 interlocked triangles, but those who knew what it meant would have gone pale just seeing it. It belonged to a black site database buried beneath one of Atlanta's city-owned data centers. It wasn't on any public map. It wasn't accessible through warrants. It was where the dirtiest law enforcement secrets were buried. Surveillance logs, tampered body cams, corrupt orders, evidence made to vanish. Elijah had discovered its existence while hacking into Voss's encrypted backup server in the aftermath of the warehouse broadcast, the one that had exposed her to the nation. But what he hadn't told anyone was that the backup had another layer, a locked file, buried deep. And the only way to unlock it was to be inside the black site itself. Everyone had told him to let it go. Malik, Tasha, even Jamal, the lawyer who had stood by him when no one else would. "You've already risked your name. Your life. You got justice," they said. But Elijah didn't believe in halfway battles. Not after everything. Not after the park bench, the beatings, the bombs, the deaths. He had to know what was inside that locked archive, because the label on the file was a name he hadn't seen in years. Jeremiah Cross, his father. A man who'd disappeared when Elijah was 10. A man the news said died in prison. But something deep inside Elijah had never believed it. And now that name, clear as day, was attached to a file inside the very core of the machine that tried to destroy him. He had to know the truth. He took the service elevator down into the bowels of the data center. The duffel bag slung over his shoulder, sweat beading at his temples. Cameras blinked red in the corners, but the patch he'd coded into his burner phone's signal jammer cut the feed just long enough for him to pass. He slid the keycard. A beep, then another. The metal doors creaked open. Cold air flooded his face. Inside, Rows and rows of humming servers stretched into darkness. At the end of the corridor was a door marked Storage L7, Secure Archive Access Only. His pulse quickened. It wasn't just fear. It was something else. A knowing. A whisper that whatever he found inside would change everything. He stepped into the room. The console awaited him. Glass screen, biometric scanner, and beneath it, a gunmetal panel marked Authorized Personnel Only. He reached into the bag, pulled out the finger. Not a real one, but a replica. Synthetic. Molded from the dead man's print. He pressed it to the scanner. The system blinked. Processing. Access granted. The screen flickered to life. Dozens of folders appeared. Classified reports, internal cover-ups, cases closed too fast. But Elijah ignored them. He typed the name. Jeremiah Cross. One result. Encrypted video log. Date. July 17th, 1998. Status. Restricted. Federal override required. He ran his bypass code. Heart hammering. What played next made his breath freeze. It wasn't his father in prison. It was his father in a chair. In a room not unlike the one Elijah now stood in. Blood on the floor, his father's shirt torn, his face bruised. A voice off camera barked, "Where's the footage, Cross? The original tape. We know you made a copy." His father, coughing blood, said, "If I give you that, the truth dies." And the screen went black. That was it. 30 seconds. But it shattered everything. Elijah collapsed against the wall, vision swimming. His father hadn't just been silenced. He'd been erased for exposing something just like Elijah had. A legacy of defiance buried by the same forces Elijah thought he'd just escaped. He copied the file to a drive, slipped it into his jacket. And then the alarms went off. Red lights flashed, doors slammed shut. Security breach. Intruder detected. They were coming. He ran, down the corridor, past the servers, through the flickering lights. His lungs screamed, his shoulder burned. But he didn't stop, because now he knew the truth. He was his father's son. The elevator was locked. No escape that way. He turned down another hallway. Sirens wailed. Footsteps echoed. He ducked into a maintenance shaft, crawled through it like an animal, heart pounding in his throat. The vent opened near the garage. He dropped out, rolled, gun in hand, the bag thudding beside him. Outside, the city was still asleep, oblivious. But Elijah wasn't the same man who entered that place. He had the proof. Not just of police corruption, not just of Voss, but of a machine that had been eating black truth for decades. He didn't sleep for 3 days after that. He moved from motel to motel, uploaded the video anonymously, watched it hit the internet like a lightning bolt. People started asking, who was Jeremiah Cross? Why did he vanish? Why was he tortured in a secret facility? They started connecting the dots. Elijah became a ghost again. Not hiding out of fear, but strategy. Watching the chaos unfold. The media had no idea where he was. They begged for interviews, statements. But he didn't speak. Not yet, because there was one more file on that drive, a second video, dated last year, showing Tanner and Voss meeting with federal agents, planning Elijah's takedown. It was never just about the wallet. It was never just about race. It was about shutting down the son of the man they couldn't silence the first time. And Elijah? He'd walked right into it. Now the world buzzed. 2 videos, both real, both damning. But still, people doubted. They always did. They asked, why didn't he go to the FBI? They asked, why steal the files? They asked, why lie before if he had the truth now? But he didn't answer. Because the war wasn't over. It was only just beginning. And if you're still here, still listening, drop a comment below right now. Tell Elijah what you would have done. Would you have walked into that black site? Would you have risked death to uncover your father's disappearance? Would you have dragged a nation back to its buried past, knowing they'd tear you apart for it? Because Elijah Cross didn't do this for praise. He didn't do it for revenge. He did it because no one else would. So if you believe he deserves to finish this fight, drop a 1 in the comments. Show him he's not alone. Let him know the risks weren't in vain. And if you still doubt him, that's okay. Drop a 2. But know this. Sometimes the truth doesn't come in clean packages. Sometimes the heroes are the ones willing to break the rules when the rules are built to bury them. Smash that like button if you think Elijah is onto something bigger than any of us can see yet. And stay locked in, because what he found that night in the dark is only a piece of what they tried to hide. The rest, it's coming. And when it does, everything you thought you knew about this world will break. Elijah Cross stood in the hallway of his rebuilt headquarters, high above Atlanta's trembling skyline, one hand pressed against the cool glass, watching the sunrise break through the smoky haze. The city below still echoed with chants, some cheering his name, others cursing it, but none of it could reach him up here. Not the noise, not the hatred, not even the praise. He was alone now, wrapped in the silence that always follows war. And oh, what a war it had been. If they only knew what it had taken, how close he'd come to giving up, how close they'd come to killing him, burying him in a grave of lies. But Elijah didn't fall. He clawed his way out. And the truth, bruised and bloodied, now stood with him like a shadow that never left. It started with a bench. A quiet bench in Liberty Square, a place Elijah had walked past 100 times, but never really seen, not until he sat on it in rags and let the world forget who he was. He wanted to understand how it felt to be unseen, to be feared, to be stripped of the shield his billions had wrapped around him for years. And the answer came fast, brutal, and louder than he could have imagined. A lie. A stolen wallet. A jogger pointing. Cops barking. The cold kiss of handcuffs. The sickening weight of the ground as they slammed him into it. The heat of a knee pressed into his back. The hate in their eyes when they looked at his skin and saw everything they despised. They didn't know who he was, but they knew what they thought he was. That was all it took. And that moment? That moment was only the matchstick. The fire that came after scorched everything. They planted evidence. They filmed him, lied about him, then beat him until his ribs cracked and his spirit bent. They framed him for arson, for violence, for chaos. They dragged him through courtrooms, through precincts, through the kind of hell that left scars no one could see. And still, he rose. He rose bleeding, but brilliant, limping, but alive, with Malik by his side, with Tasha risking everything to help him, with a laptop full of corrupted footage and bruised truths that he turned into weapons sharper than any blade. He hacked the precinct's logs, dug up hidden body cam tapes, played the system the way they'd played him. He forced the truth into the light, and the world watched as Officer Tanner was suspended, then fired. Watched as Officer Voss was unmasked, her ties to extremist groups laid bare. watched as Elijah's broken body became a symbol for everything this country tries to pretend doesn't exist. For a moment, justice felt real, until the bomb went off. 12 dead. His headquarters gutted, his name tied to it by lies crafted with surgical cruelty. They said he funded the attackers, said he built the chaos for fame. They used fake videos, edited calls, false witnesses. And again, he was hunted. Again, he was hated. Again, he had to run. This time, they lit the whole city against him. A war zone, sparked by the truth he tried to share. But Elijah didn't run to hide. He ran to finish it. He went dark, disappeared, hid in safe houses with crumbling walls and barely working power. Ate from vending machines, slept on concrete floors, lost weight, lost sleep, lost the ability to close his eyes without hearing the explosion that took those 12 lives and knowing they blamed him for it. He found an old warehouse, wired it with his own money, brought in survivors, people who believed in him, people who had nothing left but the truth, and together they hunted the final piece of this brutal puzzle, a black site, a hidden archive of secrets buried so deep even the courts wouldn't touch it. And in that archive, he found the name of a man he hadn't spoken since childhood, a name etched into his memory like a scar. Jeremiah Cross. His father, the man who vanished, the man who never came home, the man who, it turns out, tried to expose the same machine Elijah was now tearing apart. A machine that silenced him, tortured him, erased him. Erased. Elijah stood in the heart of that black site, bleeding from the elbow where glass had torn through him during his escape. He'd broken in using a stolen key card, risked federal charges, risked his life. And for what? 30 seconds of footage. 30 seconds that showed his father beaten in a room like the one Elijah now stood in, refusing to give up a copy of a tape that could have unraveled the entire system back in 1998. "I won't give it to you," his father said, coughing blood. "Because if I do, the truth dies." Those were the last words Elijah ever heard his father speak. He never saw him again. But now the world would. He uploaded the video, and it shattered everything. The country split in half, again. Some saw Elijah as a hero, completing the mission his father died for. Others called him a terrorist. They didn't know what it cost him. Didn't know the hours he spent in cells too cold for sleep. The beatings he took with hands tied behind his back. The hunger. The silence. The loneliness of knowing your name used to mean success. And now it was synonymous with danger. They didn't know the letters he kept getting. Anonymous threats mailed to his office, or worse, to his mother's house. The protests outside his company, the calls for him to be arrested, the calls for him to run for office. He didn't want power, he wanted peace. But the truth doesn't bring peace, it brings fire, and Elijah Cross was the one holding the match. He stood now, in that office tower, looking down at Liberty Square, the place it all began, the place where a man in rags was accused of theft because of the color of his skin. That man was still inside him. That pain never left. But he was stronger now. Not because he won every battle, but because he refused to let the losses define him. He stood on national television, told the world about his father, about the file, about the truth, and for once, they listened. Congress opened an investigation. The precinct was audited. Dozens of officers were fired. The video of his father aired on every major network. The president issued a statement. And Elijah Cross? He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He just sat on the same bench in Liberty Square. Quiet. Still. Wearing the same hoodie. Because he wanted people to see him. Not the billionaire, not the protester, not the warrior. Just a man, a black man, who told the truth and nearly died for it. And if you're still listening, still watching this story unfold, this is where we ask you to show Elijah you see him. Because the pain? It's real. The fight? It never ends. But your voice matters. So if Elijah's story touched something in you, hit that like button. Not for clicks, not for trends, for the man who sat on that bench, hoping the world might see him as human. For the father who never made it home. For the lies that built a system too dangerous to ignore. Drop a 1 in the comments if you believe Elijah's journey meant something. If it opened your eyes. If it made you feel something real. Drop a 2 if you're still wrestling with it. If it challenged you. If it made you uncomfortable. But whatever you do, don't look away. Because Elijah Cross's story is all of ours. And if we don't keep telling it, they'll bury it again. Like they buried his father. Like they almost buried him. But not this time. Not again. Elijah Cross stared at the cracked ceiling of the safe house, his back pressed to a cot that creaked under his bruised weight, the taste of dried blood still clinging to his split lip. The hum of the city beyond those steel walls was distant, like a world he no longer belonged to. He used to wake up to polished floors and boardroom schedules, the light from his penthouse windows washing across a skyline that bowed to him. Now, the only light came from a flickering bulb swinging overhead, casting shadows across a face the world no longer trusted. He had once been a tech titan, a black billionaire who built his empire from code and grit. But all it took was a hoodie, a park bench, and the color of his skin for the world to tear it all down. They didn't see Elijah Cross anymore. They saw a suspect, a threat, a lie. And in that cruel twist, the man who built a future had been dragged back into the past he thought he'd escaped. It started with a question. A quiet experiment in truth. Elijah wanted to understand. What would happen if he stripped away the wealth, the power, the privilege his name brought? If the world didn't know him, how would it treat him? The answer came fast. It came with batons and badges. A white jogger pointed. "He took my wallet." No proof, no pause, just accusation. And it was enough. The police descended. Voices barked. Cuffs clicked. A knee dug into his back, his face mashed into cold concrete. They didn't ask. They didn't care. They just saw skin, hoodie, and the opportunity to crush someone who couldn't fight back. They didn't know who he was, not then. But even after they found out, even after the phone he dropped lit up with headlines calling him a tech mogul, a philanthropist, a visionary, they still didn't stop. That's what broke him more than the beating. That even when the truth began to bleed out, they tried to stitch it shut with lies. Officer Tanner grinned as he planted the wallet in Elijah's hoodie, daring the world to believe a black man over a uniform. Voss, cold and calculating, watched with lifeless eyes. They dragged him in, roughed him up, and built a case on fiction while the cameras rolled and the public watched. Elijah tried to fight the right way. He stayed quiet. Trusted the system. Believed that his innocence and his status would shield him. But they twisted everything. They said he faked it. They aired doctored footage, grainy clips edited to show him sliding the wallet into his own hoodie. They labeled him a fraud, a con artist, a manipulator. His name was no longer Elijah Cross, CEO. It was Elijah Cross, liar, his face plastered across every screen with headlines that stung worse than any blow. Billionaire stages racism hoax. Publicity stunt or dangerous game? But this wasn't a stunt. This was his life, and they were destroying it. His company's board members began to resign. Contracts were canceled. Protesters, once calling for justice, now stood outside his headquarters with signs that read, "You played us." And all the while, Elijah sat in silence, his bruised fingers shaking as he watched his legacy crumble in real time. Then came the bomb. 12 people died. His company headquarters burned. And again, they blamed him. They said he incited violence, said he planted the idea, said his earlier accusations had radicalized people. They released fake audio, a spliced recording that sounded like him saying, "Burn it down, make them pay." But Elijah never said those words. Not once. Still, the world believed them. He became a fugitive in his own city. The man who used to be invited to presidential galas now slept on torn mattresses in abandoned warehouses. He wore bandages over gunshot wounds instead of tailored suits, ate protein bars instead of catered lunches, watched his name be erased from the buildings he once funded. But through all of it, he kept digging. Because one file had appeared in the hacked precinct database that made everything stop. A name, a ghost from his past. Jeremiah Cross. His father. Elijah had grown up believing his father died in prison, that he'd been locked up for theft and never came back. But what he found in that file wasn't a criminal record. It was a sealed video. Elijah watched, tears cutting through the grime on his cheeks, as a younger version of himself, his father, sat in a chair, bloodied and bruised, facing off against men in dark uniforms. "Where's the footage?" a voice demanded. "Give it to us." Jeremiah didn't flinch. "If I give you that, the truth dies." The screen went black, and Elijah broke. It had never been about him. They had done this before, to his father. Another black man who dared to speak truth to power, who paid with his life. That was the moment Elijah knew there was no walking away, that even if it killed him, he had to finish what his father started. He went dark, found the last backup of his father's footage, collected surveillance logs, testimonies, everything. And then he broadcast it. The world saw the beating in Liberty Square, the planted wallet, the cell footage, the cover-up, the audio splices, and finally, Jeremiah Cross's last stand. It hit like a tidal wave. Atlanta rioted. Congress launched an investigation. Tanner was arrested. Voss exposed for her ties to extremist networks. Even federal agents were forced to admit that black sites like the one Jeremiah was held in had existed for decades, off the books, out of the public's eye. And Elijah? He didn't run anymore. He stood on the courthouse steps with bruises on his face and pain in his eyes and said, "I was never trying to be a martyr. I just wanted to know what the world would do when it forgot my name. And now, we all know." The crowd stood in stunned silence, and then it erupted. Cheers, tears, applause that shook the pavement, because the world had finally seen him. All of him, not the billionaire, not the hoodie, but the truth. A man who had been brutalized, blamed, broken, but never silenced. And if you're hearing this story, if you've followed it all the way here, let him know it mattered. Because Elijah Cross didn't win easily. He didn't win cleanly. He won through blood, through silence, through pain that most of us will never understand. He lost his reputation, his company, his peace. He lost 12 people whose names he still whispers every night before sleep. He lost a father he'll never get to hug again. But he never stopped fighting. So if you believe Elijah deserves more than pain, hit that like button. If you believe the truth was worth all he endured, drop a 1 in the comments. And if you're still wrestling with it, if it made you uncomfortable, drop a 2. Because discomfort is where change begins. This wasn't just a story. This was a warning and a promise. Elijah Cross lived through hell to show us what the world does to truth when it comes wrapped in black skin and ragged clothes. Don't look away, not now. Because while the fire may be out, the embers are still burning. Elijah Cross stood under a flickering street lamp, his breath fogging in the cold night air, the city's sirens echoing faintly in the distance like ghosts of all he'd lost. His black hoodie clung to his bruised frame, the bullet wound on his shoulder stitched tight beneath layers of gauze, but still pulsing with heat. His eyes, once full of brilliance and defiance, now carried a quiet storm, a reflection of everything he had seen, everything he had endured. He wasn't the same man who once sat on a rusted bench in Liberty Square, testing the truth of a world that pretended color didn't matter. He had gone from being a tech giant to being hunted, framed, broken, and nearly forgotten. But now, finally, the truth had clawed its way out of the dark, and it had Elijah's blood all over it. When he first sat on that bench in tattered clothes, all he wanted was perspective. He wanted to feel what it meant to be invisible in a country that only smiled at black success when it came dressed in money. What he didn't expect was to be accused of theft, slammed to the ground by officers, beaten and dragged into a jail cell where the only thing colder than the walls was the hate in their voices. "Trash like you doesn't belong here," they spat, cuffing his wrists tight enough to draw blood. That moment was supposed to be a social experiment, but it became a nightmare, and that nightmare only deepened. Elijah's name, once praised in tech magazines and Forbes articles, disappeared behind headlines twisted with venom. Tech tycoon stages racism hoax. Billionaire behind anti-cop plot. A video, faked with expert precision, showed him slipping a wallet into his hoodie. Proof, they said, that he had stolen from the jogger. But it was a lie. Just like the arson charge that followed. Just like the bombing of his company headquarters that killed 12 innocent employees. An act Elijah was blamed for, but had no part in. His world burned around him, and no one cared to check the ashes for truth. He ran. Not out of fear, out of survival. He hid in safe houses with boarded windows and dusty floors. He ate from vending machines, his stomach twisting not just from hunger, but from heartbreak. Malik stayed by his side, loyal as ever, even when the news showed Elijah's face next to flames, even when bounty hunters and protesters lined the streets. "You can still walk away," Malik had told him one night, voice soft. "Just disappear. Let them have their lies." But Elijah couldn't. Because if he walked away, then all the pain, his and every black man beaten and buried by silence, meant nothing. So he fought back. With broken ribs and bloodied lips, he hacked into encrypted precinct files. He pulled video from the police holding cell, the footage that showed Officer Tanner slamming a baton across his back, Officer Voss planting the jogger's wallet, sneering, "Who's gonna believe you?" He leaked it. let the world see what he saw. The tide turned for a moment. The chants outside changed from liar to justice for Elijah. Tanner was suspended. Voss investigated. But their power ran deep, and their reach was long. They released another fake tape. A manipulated audio recording of Elijah saying, "Burn it down. Make them pay." Spliced with riot footage, bricks flying, glass shattering. Suddenly the hero was a monster again. Protesters turned on him. His allies disappeared. His company stocks crashed. Even people he once mentored went silent. And worst of all, he started to question himself. Sitting in a dark motel room, watching the news scream, "Elijah Cross incites domestic terror," he asked, "What if they're right?" His voice trembled. What if fighting them made me just like them? Malik knelt beside him, hands on Elijah's shoulders, saying, "You didn't start the fire. They did. You just stopped letting it burn in silence." That night, Elijah made a choice. He went back to the beginning, to the place no one dared to go, to a hidden facility beneath Atlanta's City Records building, a black site where secrets were buried and history rewritten. There, he uncovered the truth that hit harder than any baton. His father, Jeremiah Cross, hadn't died in prison, as he'd believed for 2 decades. He'd been taken, tortured, disappeared, because he, too, had tried to expose a corrupt system, the very system that now hunted Elijah. Elijah found the footage, a 30-second video of his father bleeding in a chair, refusing to give up evidence of police misconduct. "If I give it to you, the truth dies," his father whispered, voice shaking, just before the screen went black. That file had been hidden for years, locked behind federal firewalls and sealed under threat of national security. But Elijah made it public. He uploaded it alongside the footage of his own beating. 2 generations, 2 victims, same system, same silence. The world exploded again. But this time, the flame caught. People marched, not just in Atlanta, but in cities nationwide. Journalists dug into the black site's existence. Investigations reopened. Newscasters cried on air reading Jeremiah Cross's name. Suddenly, Elijah's pain wasn't just personal. It was a mirror held up to an entire nation. Tanner was arrested. Voss tried to flee, but was caught. Her trial became the most watched event of the year. And for the first time, someone who wore a badge and abused it was sentenced without delay, without excuses. She cried on the stand, said she was just doing her job. Elijah sat in the front row, his face unreadable. But justice didn't feel like triumph. It felt like survival. Because what people didn't see, what cameras never captured, was the toll. They didn't see Elijah stitching his own wounds in a prison cell with thread torn from his shirt. They didn't see the night he passed out from blood loss in a warehouse filled with crashed laptops and grief-stricken survivors. They didn't see the scars, physical and emotional, that kept him up at night, every time a door slammed or a siren wailed. They didn't see the mother who called him sobbing, terrified she'd lose her son the way she lost her husband. They didn't see the way he flinched when someone reached into their pocket too fast. They saw a symbol, but he was still a man, still hurting, still healing. When the final press conference came, Elijah didn't stand behind a podium. He sat on that same rusted bench in Liberty Square, wore the same hoodie, stared straight into the camera and said, "I didn't want to be a hero. I wanted to know what it felt like to be powerless in a world that praises power. I wanted to feel what too many of us feel every day. And I did. It nearly killed me, but I survived. And if you're hearing this, if you're watching, then that means the truth survived too. For my father. For the 12. For all of us. He paused, his voice breaking. I never thought justice would feel like this. Then he stood, walked away. No applause, no bodyguards, just a man and the truth he refused to let die. And if you've made it to the end of this journey, if Elijah's story moved you, shook you, changed something in the way you see the world, hit that like button. Not for fame, not for numbers. For the man who fought with his body, his code, his voice, until the world had to listen. Drop a 1 in the comments if you believe Elijah's pain wasn't in vain. Drop a 2 if you think the fight still isn't over, because it's not. Elijah Cross may have walked off that bench, but the story? It's just beginning. And we'll be here to tell it. Together.